Welcome back to Total Racing, round 2 of Ultrasonic cleaning solution testing. I don't know why that's such a tongue tie, but it is for me this morning. So anyway, we are doing all the testing on the original engine out of this Chevy Caprice. This is a 1990 Chevy Caprice. That is the original engine. So it's a police car, and then it was my personal car for years and years, and then it sat in a shipping container. And then we did a full build on it. So that video will be coming out on the YouTube channel here very soon. It's a 6-speed manual, DZ302 clone with solid roller cam. It's going to be a pretty cool car. We did full restoration basically on that car. Front to back. I got a few things left to do to it and it'll be done. We're taking a piston and rod assembly and all the valve train from each cylinder to test out our solutions. 6 out of the 8 cleaners we're using today are viewer suggestions, or just curiosity, not necessarily suggestions, but just want to see what would happen if you did certain things. So that's what we're going to do. So in cylinder number 1, I stamped the cylinder components. Cylinder number 1 is going to be getting TurboKlean. So this was actually sent to me from them for me to try. This is not intended for ultrasonic cleaning, but we're going to give it an honest go and see how well it works. The next cylinder number 2, is also a TurboKlean product. This is an all-purpose cleaner. Again, not intended for this. It's intended more for those dishwasher-style parts cleaners, but we're going to see how it'll work on here. This is user recommendation from quite a few people, Vinegar. So we're going to try this. This will be the only solution we're trying straight. That'll be on cylinder number 3. LA's Awesome Cleaner. This was probably the most common recommendation, but however, it wasn't available at the dollar store in the original formula, so I had to go to Home Depot to get that. But I'm not sure if the orange is the same or not. We're not going to try the orange on this round. We're going to try the original version, and that's on cylinder number 4. Cylinder number 5 is getting drain cleaner. So this was a suggestion a few times. Mainly the main active ingredient was, and so I went and had to pick that up, and we're going to see if we can't destroy a piston with it, because that's what I think is going to happen. Then Simple Green. This is another very common suggestion. We're going to see how well that works. Dawn dish soap. Apparently last time I used the wrong one, so we're going to use the right one this time, and we're going to see how well it doesn't work. And then Pine Sol. This was another highly recommended one, recommended by quite a few people. We're going to see how well it works. So first off is going to be our TurboKlean. This is cylinder number 1. We're going to let this preheat to 80 degrees Celsius. This is what the parts look like laid out. In goes the parts after it was preheated, and then that's going to sit for 30 minutes. Cylinder number 2, this is getting the other TurboKlean product. This is the all-purpose product. This one, he wanted a specific pH, so we're doing that one at between 11 and 12, and I got it really close to the 12 side beforehand, but the solution was already a little bit warm by the time I tested it, so it may have been reading a little higher than it actually was. Then cylinder number 3 here is getting the vinegar. That one was straight. Cylinder number 4 is getting totally awesome. That one is 1 part totally awesome to 3.5 gallons or so of water. And we'll go ahead and dunk those in. All these parts are going to be sitting for 30 minutes, and then we're going to pull them and flip all the parts. That one looks pretty cool as it starts to go. Some of the oil was floating on the surface, wasn't breaking down right away, but eventually it did break down. Cylinder number, what is this, number 5? Yep, cylinder number 5 is getting our drain cleaner. I actually did this one last, so some of these are taken out of order because I really didn't want to be in the shop while the drain cleaner was in there, but it ended up not being as bad as I was thinking. So that one, I preheated the water first and then poured in the solution just because I didn't want to be in here while it was doing that. And again, it didn't turn out that bad. Cylinder number 6 getting Simple Green, which looks like antifreeze once it's all mixed up, but crazy bright green. Cylinder number 7 is getting this Dawn dish soap. We used half a bottle to 4.5 gallons or so of water, and it doesn't really look like it's doing much. So I haven't been impressed with Dawn in here, but a lot of guys swear by it. So we're going to give it a go again. I don't have very high expectations of it. And then cylinder number 8 is getting Pine Sol. So this one actually ends up being a little more concentrated because the bottle is higher. It's like 1.25 gallon bottle. So it's a little higher concentration than the rest of the products. And I forgot to mention that the TurboKlean, the original TurboKlean formula on cylinder number 1, I only used half a bottle on that. That's what he recommended I try. Spoiler alert a little bit. I wish I would have just done the whole bottle like I did all the others. But then on obviously cylinder number 2, we were shooting for that certain pH. So that ended up being about 3/4 of a gallon, and then 3 3¼ gallons of water. So after the 30 minutes, we're flipping all the parts. So I'm just taking the basket out and flipping all the parts over, and putting them back in for an additional 30 minutes. The simple green actually looked pretty good after the first round. First round of Dawn, I'm not going to lie, this looks terrible. It has all sorts of buildup and stuff on the parts. Really, really odd, but it does seem to wipe right off. So it's not all over yet for Dawn, but we'll see how it works. So those are all done now. We're going to take them all out. So I intentionally did not rinse any of these parts because I do not want to introduce corrosion that wouldn't be there aside from whatever the cleaner's doing. If you're actually using this product for real, obviously that's going to vary. So each basket I'm pulling out, aside from the drain opener, all I'm doing is pulling them out, blowing them dry, and then we're setting them up. And that's how we're going to review the products. And that's across the board, except for the drain opener. The drain opener I did rinse off just because I didn't want to be handling the parts. Even if the stuff dried on there, I didn't really want to be handling the parts that way. Another thing I should point out is I did not scrub any of these parts. If it wouldn't come off with the air wand, then it stayed. Obviously, a lot of things I'm doing are going to be different if you're using this stuff for real, but these are all sacrificial parts that I'm cleaning. And the other thing is, obviously, you wouldn't put aluminum and steel in the basket together, or at least I wouldn't, generally speaking. Depending on the cleaner. I guess if you find a cleaner that does everything well. The problem is most cleaners will do steel well, or it'll do aluminum well, and very rarely does it do both really well. That's kind of what we're trying to find here, is something that does everything well without sacrificing in another area. And that's wishful thinking in a lot of places, but there is a couple products here that did pretty well across the board, but nothing that was just outstanding on everything. The other thing we're going to do is pH test all the solutions. This is as used, not concentrated. So this is diluted, basically, solution. If it were something I diluted, I was just doing vinegar there, and obviously that's straight. And we're going to have the pH numbers for each of these solutions. So we will go over that here right now. All right, guys, it's time for results, and this is how I'm going to do it. I made a notes sheet here. And last time I tried to assess a 1 through 5 on how everything did in different categories. And that ended up being probably not the most accurate way. Without writing an exact criteria on what it was, that was more difficult to do. So what I did this time is I just chose the 3 best in each category and then ranked them 1 through 3. And that's how we're going to do it. And then I did 8, which is the worst. So of each category, I chose the worst. And that's how I did it. So that's how we're going to do it this time. Let's get into the results. I also did pH, so that's going to be interesting. So I'm going to do pH level on each one as tested, not straight. First up is the TurboKlean. This is cylinder number 1, rod number 1. This one, we used half of a bottle to about 4 gallons or so of water. And this actually came in, even at that light of a dilution, it came in at a 12.7 pH. So that's as used. Speaking of which, our water here, which is well water, comes in at a 7.4 on the pH level. So how did our TurboKlean multi-purpose do? Well, we're just going to go down the list on what it did well, and we're going to skip everything it didn't do well. So it podiumed in 3 categories. The first of which is the push rods. They're very, very clean push rods. However, there's a little bit of haziness to them. So it won a 2nd place finish for that. The valves. It did fairly well. This got a 2nd place on the valves. Believe it or not, that is a 2nd place valve. This the carbon on the intake valves and exhaust valves has proven to be very, very tough on all of these cleaners. And then its last podium finish was for these bolts. So these are head bolts. The shorter bolts are the ones that are on the outside of the valve cover and right underneath the exhaust manifold. So these were very, very rusty. And it did a very good job at getting the thread sealer off and getting most of the rust off. And if we ran this one more cycle, I think those would have looked even a little bit better. So that's where it did well. I am going to point out on all of them how much it corroded the piston. So this corroded the piston lightly. It wasn't nearly as bad as you would think with that high of a pH. But it did fairly well on the piston, but it didn't clean it absolutely perfectly. Cylinder number 2 got the TurboKlean all-purpose. This is one we were actually aiming on a pH level. So these guys sent this out, and he told me to shoot for a pH between 11 and 12. And when I put it in there, the water was kind of warm because I used hot water. It came in at 12.6. I was trying to get 12.5. Well, I'm sorry. It came in at 11.6, and I was shooting for 11.5. Then afterwards, and everything cooled down, and I tested it again, it ended up being 10.9. So I'm not sure if I got it as concentrated as it should have been. But either way, this is probably one of my favorites of the group for steel. So this has a lot of podium finishes for this cleaner. For the rocker arms, this got first place. These are very clean, probably cleaner than a factory rocker arm when it was new. Very, very good job on the rocker arms. So it won first place for that. It easily has the brightest push rods of the group with zero haziness whatsoever. These probably are shinier than they were when they were new. You can still see a little bit where it was rubbing on the cylinder head as it passed through the cylinder head for 30 years of use. But it did very well on those push rods. So that was a first place finish in that. It got third place on the valves, so it didn't remove the carbon as well as you'd think it would for how well it cleaned everything else, but it did struggle at that carbon quite a bit. And then it got first place on the bolts, so there's no rust left on the heads of the bolts and no thread cleaner left on, or thread sealer, I'm sorry, left, or very little thread sealer left. It did a really good job at cleaning those head bolts up. It also got first place on the rod. That rod is insanely bright. It didn't etch at all where it's machined, and it almost looks like it's shot peened in all the raw casting. These are cast steel rods. And then it got first place on the valve springs. These valve springs are insanely bright. It cleaned those things just phenomenally. So that did very, very good on that. So I'm extremely happy with this cleaner all the way around for steel products. But it is a little corrosive on the aluminum, a little more corrosive than the multi-purpose that we just went over, but it wasn't the worst. All right, so this is a user recommendation by quite a few people, Vinegar. So this is the only one we ran straight. That has a pH level after use of 4.8. So even with that low pH number, it did fairly well at cleaning everything without ruining anything. So I was pretty happy with that. Everything is still stained a little bit, but it did remove most of the carbon off the top of the piston, discolored it a little bit, but it didn't etch it at all or corrode it at all. So it did really well on the piston. In fact, on the piston, that's third place for the best, and that's mostly because it didn't cause any damage to the piston, not that it cleaned it super good. And then it did third place finish on these nuts. They're a little hazy, but it cleaned them pretty well. Whatever that metal is on the outside, definitely was a fan of the Vinegar. And then it got third place on the rod, believe it or not. So the rod is pretty clean, almost like if it would have ran through a couple more cycles, it would have looked a little better. But it did a pretty good job at cleaning the rod up. And then the biggest point to the Vinegar is that it didn't ruin anything. Cylinder number 4 got LA's Totally Awesome. This was a very, very popular one to recommend. So I was pretty excited to try it here. That LA's Awesome came in at a pH level 11.7 as we tested it. Okay, so let's just hit the piston right away. The piston is pretty oxidized, or I shouldn't say that. It's pretty corroded. Or etched, or whatever you want to call it, but it basically the aluminum wasn't a real big fan of that. LA's Totally Awesome. And while we're pointing things out that are odd, the rod is purple. I'm not sure what it did to that rod and why it looks like that, but it kind of looks fish scaly. It actually looks really cool, but I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or not. I don't think it hurt the rod, but it definitely discolored it. It podiumed third place for the rocker arms, so they're a little hazy, but they're pretty clean. And it doesn't look like it damaged them at all. It did third place on the bolts. It got most of the thread sealer off. And the bolts look all in all pretty good, but there is still a little bit of rust left on the heads of those shorter bolts. And then last but not least, it got third place for the valve springs. They actually look pretty good. They're just not quite as bright as the leading two, but they look pretty good all in all. I'm more than happy with how clean those are. I wouldn't I wouldn't hesitate on using that for those again. So last up, drain cleaner that wasn't necessarily a highly recommended one, but sodium hydroxide was, which is soda lye. So it drain cleaner is basically what that is. So that's what I used. I was really hoping for more carnage. I kind of was hoping for a little bit of drama with this one, and I didn't get it, but it did win 8th place for the most corroded piston. It has really deep etching, and it's kind of odd looking. It's glittery, like if you're looking at fiberglass. it's like glittery like that. So it's very odd how much it etched the aluminum, which was to be expected. What wasn't to be expected is that it only came in at a pH level of 10.8, which I thought was really odd. I was expecting it to be a lot higher number than that, and maybe I should have used more of it. And in fact, if I would have used more, it probably would have done more damage to the piston and maybe done better in other categories. So that being said, I'm kind of over that. I'm not even going to look at the rest of the stuff. There's no reason to use that. I wouldn't use it. I don't really see why anyone would want to use that. All right, cylinder 6 got simple green. This was recommended a lot by people. And I can see why they recommended it, because this did really well. Let's take a look at the results here. So this thing podiumed in quite a few categories. Let's go over those now. First category is piston. This is a first place finisher in piston. I know it looks a little funny, but it's not etched at all or corroded at all. It just has a little bit of an oily finish to them. And it may or may not like being thrown in for maybe another couple rounds through the ultrasonic, but it looks really good other than the discoloring. But the discoloring is more of like an oil or something like that. It's not it's not like etching it. It doesn't seem. The rocker arms are the second place finish, and this could be argued that these should be first place. The only reason I ranked them second, they're very clean, but they're also still oily, which was really odd. But it didn't eliminate the oil from the rocker arms. They're still oily. It's odd, but they're insanely clean. It did a really good job at cleaning them. It just didn't remove the oil from them, which is, I think, the same reason why that piston looks a little odd. It got third place for the push rods, and this was actually really close to second place. They're just a little bit more hazy than the second place finisher, but they did really well. And had we rinsed them, it might have been different, but I didn't rinse any of them, so it's not fair to rinse one and not another. It got second place on these nuts. It did really well in there, just not quite as bright as the first place finisher. It got second place on the rod. As you can see, that is a really nice looking rod. It's just not quite as bright as the first place finisher, but that is a very acceptable clean on the rod. It did really well on that. I'm really happy with how that rod came out. Valve springs, it was also second place. So this is a very clean assembly. It's not quite as bright as first place, but it is very clean. It did a really good job at it. And again, a little bit oily still, just kind of odd. And it did, of course, struggle with the valves. Simple green comes in at 9.1 on the pH. Cylinder set number 7 got Dawn. This one's an interesting one. I had terrible results with Dawn last time, and this time we didn't get terrible results, but it didn't do particularly well. pH on this ended up being 8.8 after it was mixed. So let's take a look here. So everything has a soapy feel to it because I didn't rinse anything. That's nothing to knock it for. That's just the kind of the way it is. But Dawn did get first place in the category of valves. So look how much of the carbon it got off. It doesn't look right because it probably doesn't look as nice as some of the others just because it's still covered in soap. But the carbon, it loosened up that carbon really good actually. So that being said, it also didn't ruin anything. So would this be a good pre-treatment before putting it in the cleaner of choice for whatever you're going to use? Very possible that could be a good use for it. Now it does have 2 last place finishes, but it's not because it ruined them. It's just because it didn't clean them for crap. It didn't clean the nuts very good. And what was the other one? It didn't clean the rod at all. The rod looks pretty bad. It didn't ruin it. It just didn't clean it. So, and it's gross and it's oily and it's sticky because it's covered in Dawn. So anyway, Dawn has its place. I just haven't quite found it yet, but maybe pre-soaking stuff or pre-washing stuff in Dawn first. It could be a good use for that. I'm not sure. I know a lot of people like it though. Okay, so Pine Sol was our cylinder number 8, and this one was odd. I didn't think of this one at all, but it was recommended quite a few times, and I think it came from watchmaker stuff because they used it on brass. But here's how it came out: 3.2 on the pH, so it's odd. It's a kind of the oddball as far as the lowest number on pH. But did it do good? It's really tough to say how well it did. It's very good at the piston and the aluminum. It did well. It didn't remove all the carbon, but it also left the piston looking very very natural and very nice. The piston looks good, and I think if it went through a couple more cycles, it would look even better. So it ended up being in second place for the piston behind the Simple Green. Unfortunately, now the rest of the things that we have to talk about on this are last place finishes. So it had last place finish on the rocker arms because it almost ruined them. I wouldn't use this rocker arm again because everything feels very etched. It's very rough feeling now. The push rods are the same, very, very etched, like a scratchy, like chalky feel to them. Very, very, very weird, and it's like the more hard the surface, the worse it did that to it. The pivots that go inside the rocker arm there, these things are insanely rough. I mean, it's almost like I blasted them with a really coarse grit blast media. So it did very, very bad on those. It didn't touch the carbon hardly at all, so it was the worst on the carbon. And then the valve springs obviously look terrible. So it was last place on the valve springs, but it didn't ruin anything other than everything made of steel. So that being said, I can see why watchmakers and stuff use it, or watch restorers, because I bet you this thing's very good on brass and aluminum and stuff, but definitely do your trials before you just go and start dunking some antique watch parts in Pine Sol. But it did do very well on that aluminum without destroying the aluminum. But I would use a lot of caution doing anything other than that. All right, so I made a little spreadsheet of my notes from my notepad so you can kind of see what I was looking at there. There's some really cool results there and some disappointing results as well. The drain cleaner disappointed me, but for the wrong reasons. I was really hoping for more carnage. I kind of think that maybe that dollar store drain cleaner isn't quite as potent as maybe a name brand version of it, or something. And that shows in just that really low pH number. That's besides the point. I wasn't expecting that one to do very good. I was just hoping to get some carnage out of it. I'm not going to do any more with that stuff, though, because we already know that it's terrible, and I really don't want to mess around with it any more than I have to. So what are the best ones that I think from this round are definitely TurboKlean All-Purpose was amazing at steel. I mean, that is like the brightest steel I think I've ever seen come out of my ultrasonic cleaner. And then the Simple Green, how universal that Simple Green was. And I'm shocked that I didn't do that the first round. I know of Simple Green, but that one worked really well. And now I'm really curious to do a round 3 because there's a few more that I want to try, one of which is the Simple Green Extreme. Definitely comment below because I need as many recommendations as I can so I can whittle down 8 options for round 3. And then I think after round 3, I'm going to go through and we're going to compare the top 3 or the top detergents from those 3 rounds, and then we're going to try to improve upon those and come up with the best cleaner of all time, or at least the best steps to cleaner at all time, and maybe start playing around with mixing 2 of them. So anyway, like, subscribe, share. That's how these videos get traction. Otherwise, they will just fall flat on their face and they will never be seen again. So definitely like, subscribe, and comment, and we will see you again on the next one.